Our next speaker will be Anne-Sophie Bories, who is going to talk us about jokes without humor. Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So this work that I'm presenting today is very much still in progress. And I'm afraid I haven't collected all the data that I wanted because it's manual annotation and it has been taking a lot of time. But so the project that I'm currently working in, Comic Verse, is interested in exploring jointly issues of verse and issues of humor. And within that, I am manually annotating a number of things inside my corpus. And the things that I'm annotating are not always jokes, but they function like jokes. So what I found very interesting when I started looking at what a joke is from a structural point of view, not in terms of what the use of a joke, what the use of humor, the meaning of laughter and all that is, but in terms of how a joke is built, is that it resembles a lot of other things that are not jokes. And so I thought it would be interesting to have a look at things that function the same way as jokes, but that are not. So anyway, our difficulty when we started annotating humor to fill our joke table, which does not just include jokes, is how can you tag the funniness, and really, should you? Is something funny? Is it not funny? It's funny to me, but it's not funny at all. Can you, even if you try to step away from funniness, can you tag the humorous intent of an occurrence? That would also require a level of intelligence that I do not possess. So basically what we are tagging is more in the region of incongruity, which is a way to describe the presence of two simultaneous scripts overlapping each other. So this is the way that two American linguists have been describing jokes. So Artaud and Raskin's general theory of verbal humor posits that in a joke you have two scripts. One is visible, the other, the parallel script, is not visible, but it's there since the beginning. And the punchline that comes at the end of the joke suddenly triggers the switch between one script to the other, and then you realize that there was that underlying script. And often you can have a number of jab lines within the joke that would possibly hint at the presence of an underlying scenario, but their incongruity is not sufficient to trigger the switch. So this is an example, it's in French, but the second line is a parody of the first one. The first one is a line by Lamartine, it's very well known as a lettre de manque à tout est dépeuplé. It's about solitude after losing the love of someone. And the parody replaces être, the verb to be, or in this case, the person, the being, by être, which sounds exactly the same, but it's the name of a tree. I think it's the birch. So only one birch is missing, and then everything becomes poplars. When you first see être, you can see that something's a little bit wrong. Could be a typo. The pronunciation is roughly the same, and then when you get to the end of the verse, then you switch to the second scenario, you understand the joke. So this is not about whether it's funny. So we built a so-called joke table within our database, based on those description frames. In that table, we have the start and end of the joke-like structures that we encounter. We also tag all the jab lines and all the punchlines. Obviously, this is quite prone to variability. I think different annotators would tag it quite differently. And that's something that I'm almost comfortable with, because what I want to do is to have a look at the entirety of the comments that I've been making on the text that I'm studying. So the stability is not really part of my dream, because I don't think I could be able to achieve it, but the richness of the annotations that I'm producing are something I want to be able to look at from a larger perspective. We also have a number of other knowledge resources, as Rustin calls them. Script oppositions, this is what is being opposed between the two scripts, real, not real, for instance, or human, not human, sex, not sex. The things that are typically opposed in the double scenario of a joke. We have logical mechanisms, which are very open lists, and our list is still growing. We keep adding new logical mechanisms to the list. It could be things like the homophony of two words, something that the joke relies upon in order to create the incongruity. There's a narrative strategy. You will see that so far I'm not using it that much. It hasn't proven as interesting. There's the possibility to add a target, if any, at the butt of the joke, and we have a field to add the situation, but this is not a field we can use for statistical purposes. It's just an open field that we can freely add comments to. These are so far the script oppositions that we rely upon, and so those are the ones I've been tagging in the corporation. Those are the narrative strategies. So a typical joke structure will be a question and answer. What's the difference between a squirrel? It's symmetrical, whatever. A narrative strategy, description, or then we've added address and list because those are things that we have encountered in our corpora. And a number of logical mechanisms, the list is open. Those are the ones that I've been tagging so far. You will see that in some of the figures, I've removed them because there was too little data. They were not being used enough by the poets that I'm looking at. So, we are thus annotating not humor, but double scripts. And in doing so, we are ignoring the humorous intent or the humorous efficacy. And my aim here is to observe together humorous and non-humorous texts in order to shed light precisely on non-humorous texts. And I'm looking at three texts. Two texts by Apollinaire, a collection of poems called Alcor, another collection of poems called Le Bestiaire, and a very beautiful poem by Aimé Césaire that is the same size as the collection of poems, but it is one very long poem. It's about 40 pages long. And this is how they look like. The Bestiaire it brings together a very nice woodcutting with a very small poem. They're all very short, and they're all centered around an animal. They have a lot of word plays, usually around the name of the animal. This is how the collection Alcohol looks like. This is the first few lines of the first poem. This is a collection of Apollinaires in free verse, mostly long verse. And this is the text of Aimé Césaire. This is just one paragraph amongst many. Le Cahier d'un retour au pays natal. This is a very moving and absolutely not humorous text. So the two texts by Apollinaire, the Bestiaire is fairly humorous. The Alcohol has some humor in it, some jokes, but it's not mostly a humorous collection. And the Cahier d'un retour au pays natal is very far from humorous, it's quite the opposite. It's a very hard and violent text. Césaire is from Martinique Island, and so he's addressing in this poem issues of racism and slavery and the dehumanization process of the racist violence. So what strikes me in this text is how difficult it is when you offer it to students. To me, the Cahier d'un retour au pays natal is a very moving text. I get completely hypnotized by its beauty, also by the violence of it, and the very striking images. But it's also a text that is difficult to follow and difficult to understand. It doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of the time. And it's not about the difficulty of the language, because the students manage to study Baudelaire, which is also difficult. They manage to study texts where the language is not so easy. They can use a dictionary. But when they are confronted to Césaire, something shuts down. They find it too difficult. And so I had an idea that maybe this was for logical reasons more than just the state. Okay, so I tagged only a quarter of the Cahier d'un retour au pays natal, which means I can't have, unfortunately, a view of how the situation evolves throughout the length of the poem, which I would have wanted to be able to see. But I have other things that I can see. So here you can see in three colors the three collections, the three texts. The one that I'm most interested in is the green one, the Cahier d'un retour au pays natal. So the Cahier d'un retour au pays natal has rather shorter lines. You can see that on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you can see that the number of elements in the jokes, the number of jab lines and punchlines that are in each joke, is higher in the case of Aimé Césaire's text, in the case of the Cahier. So, even though his lines are very long, sometimes they spread over several lines. A line can actually be a paragraph in the Cahier. Despite this structure of the poetry itself, his jokes themselves are often short and dense, with a lot of punchlines and jab lines compared to Apollinaire. This is an example which is quite typical. The first example is from Apollinaire, nous lui dit mes adieux et puis, de ce puis sortit l'espérance. So the first puis means and then, the second is the well, where you get water. It's a very simple pun, but it's spread over a very long joke. The second is a citation of the Cahier, un vieux silence crevant de pustules tièdes. You can see that in this case, the number of jab lines, the number of small incongruities that make you aware that maybe something is odd is very numerous. And even though it's all spread in a very small number of words, the strict opposition here in the second case is basically between human and silence. So the silence is compared to a person that would be sick and dying. The very strict oppositions that we looked at, here I've compared them for the three texts to the longer jokes. The y-axis is a logarithmic scale, so it's important to keep that in mind. You can see that there are some major differences in the case of what is possible and impossible, this opposition, and also the opposition between human and non-human. So those are where the most striking differences are between the corpora, and those are the two themes that are most important precisely to Césaire. So we can maybe think that Césaire, in this case, for those two themes, is diverging from what would be a norm. By making, in the case of oppositions between human and non-human, possible and impossible, normal and normal, shorter jokes, and whilst in other places he does what he does is not so different from Apollinaire's work. And then those are heat maps of what the strict oppositions in each corpus, how they link to each other, how they compare, which ones are happening together in the same joke, because for one joke you can tag several strict oppositions. It doesn't have to be just human, non-human, it could be human, non-human, and then also life and death, for instance. We can see that in Apollinaire's Alcool, the question of life-death is very present, the strict opposition between life-death and between actual and non-actual. Also, normal and normal is fairly links quite well to the other strict oppositions, but it's quite different when you look at the Vestiaire, also of Apollinaire. And here, what is most present is human, non-human. This makes complete sense because his jokes are about animals. So whether the animal is an animal or a human is going to happen quite often. And high-low stature also makes sense between when you compare animals and humans. So this is really sort of expected from the text. And then in Aimé Césaire, the strict oppositions that link together are almost only human, non-human, and life and death, which of course are very central themes in a poem that is about slavery. So this links very closely to the way the themes that are more present in this collection. Now, those are examples of the human-non-human incongruity in Césaire. And typically, he will use a very large number of different script oppositions that all link back to the question of human-non-human. The question is not usually, is this black slave a human or not a human? That's not it. It's in the example of the bottom, the month of September is the midwife of cyclones. So it's wind or human. The little church is not intimidating, and it allows you to feel it quite benevolently. So is the church human or not human? And it's a lot of that kind of figures where anything, a house, a town, a city, anything can be human, non-human. It's not about comparing humans to non-humans, but about comparing things to humans. Here in this graph, the y-axis shows the placement of the punchline, because normally a punchline is at the end of a joke. But occasionally it can be in another position. It can happen early in the joke, which is, if you're trying to have a strong impact, it's a little bit counterproductive, because your audience immediately knows what the joke is, and then all the jab lines that come after that are just prolonging the joke. So basically, the lines should all normally be at the top of those little graphs, because the placement of the punchline should be towards the end of the joke. And we see a few cases where it's not the case, and I'm looking mostly again at Aimé Césaire. And those are human and human, life-death, action, non-action. Obscenity is difficult to look at because there's too few data. So I don't think I can make a generalization on the question of obscenity. It's not very present in the cahier. But human, non-human, life-death, and action, non-action, which are very present in the cahier, are three instances where Césaire chooses to quite often put his at the wrong place. And to that thing, yes. Quickly, the logical mechanisms, we also see some anomalies in the case of what Césaire is doing. Again, Césaire is in green. In most cases, his punchlines, whatever the logical mechanism, tend to be at the end of the occurrence, but not always. In particular in the case of mapping and metaphor. So mapping is when you put two systems next to each other and you postulate a parallelism between the two systems, so you equate different parts of the two. And those are examples of that phenomenon. So in the first example, Césaire is comparing a house. We're not sure to what, whether an animal or a person that is in a very exploited situation. So the house is walking on its hands, and it's not trying to get up and protest. And then the second example is about a river. In this case, the punchline is at the end of the occurrence, but the system that is used is mapping. And so the river is described with a lot of words that are typically used for humans. So it's sick, and it's lying in bed, and it doesn't have any turgescence or depression. And all of those are a little bit ambiguous. They make you think that there's something, that there is a metaphor. You can see that there is a metaphor. And then when the river becomes uncertain of whether it's flowing or not, incertain de fluer, this is definitely human thinking. A river is not uncertain of its own flow, but a human might be. And the last one I like, because it's also very typical of what Césaire is doing. He's comparing here the road, climbing up the mountain, and the road suddenly plunges down the mountain. But instead of plunging, he says to picking depth, which is really, it's a phrase that you would only use for a human plunging in water, dipping his head in the water. And so all of a sudden the road is clearly compared to a human, at the beginning, and then the jab lines bring it back to a more understandable meaning. So the incongruity happens right at the beginning, and that's quite often that you get struck by something so incongruous that it's very difficult to keep following the logic of the sentence to understand, oh yeah, this is a metaphor. Initially, it's more than a metaphor, it's a very striking image. And then it normalizes it, so to speak, and then it becomes a more easy to follow metaphor, a system that is easier to follow. So, yes, this is where I am at right now, looking at where he places his punchlines. And my idea is that I still have to improve, I think, the way I tag my corpus in order to get more stability. But I find that it is accessing something. Of course, all of those are figures that you could describe with other stylistic vocabulary. But I find this angle interesting because Tony Beach wrote that the humor is a pain, a cognitive pain that doesn't hurt because there's no actual danger. But in the case of Césaire, I would say he's using that pain of the jokes, he's using that cognitive discomfort that we get when we are confronted to a sudden incongruity and to the presence of two incompatible interpretations of what we're seeing. And instead of resolving that pain with the pleasantness of humor, he does not. So I think it's quite an effective strategy to cause a maximum discomfort in the reader. And I think that's also what makes his work difficult to read, difficult to teach to students, because they have to go with it and accept that, yes, it is cognitively painful to read, but this is part of the work, and it's part of the pleasure that you get from reading it. And I don't know my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We still have time for questions. Do we have any? I was really thinking, kind of, would it ever be possible to recognize these kinds of things just purely computationally? I mean, tagging it, you get something out of it that you wouldn't be able manually, but...
It's a good question. So some people are automatically detecting some specific forms of irony, but on very short utterances, tweets, customer reviews. But basically, I think to some extent you could, yes, detect incongruity because but it's only for some forms of it. When it's based on the polysemy of a word, for instance, then this word should be in one context. Even though it can appear in a completely different context, then it's a different word. Especially in French, where we have very few words, and we use the same words in different contexts, and they mean completely different things. So the co-presence of two different contexts would signal that this polysemy is being exploited there. And this is actually also how, as humans, we perceive it. With those little jab lines, we can see that the jab line is pointing us towards a possible other context for what we're being given. But I'm not sure that it would efficiently detect all the different mechanisms that can be used. And in my case, what I want to gather is would be more something that the richness of interpretation that you get from manual annotation, even though it has a lot of disadvantages, than something that you would get automatically. I think those are different kind of information that you get. And just very personally, I'm more interested in this kind of information and being able to see it all at once. But other things in our database are automatically detected, like the metric system and other things, but not this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you have any questions? Please.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is really interesting, and you're right. It's very difficult to I understand how difficult it might be to understand the structures and how something is striking, either as a joke or something as a very powerful language. I had just a suggestion that maybe you could try to analyze, in the same way as you did with Césaire, a poem rewritten by the European method of the S+7. You know that when a noun, it's a funny constraint that they are producing text, that they take a formally written text and they change every seventh, every noun by the help of a dictionary, searching the word in the dictionary and searching the seventh word in the dictionary, the seventh noun coming and changing for that one. And it gives really funny text. So there are some nice examples in Raymond Queneau and some of his followers. So
yes.
it is just an answer.
It's a very good idea. I wonder, because it's true that the physical, the phonetic almost aspect of the source A, the text A, is almost preserved, because when you just go 7 words down, you still have a lot of the beginning of the word is still the same. So the text B still looks the same as the text A. So you really have that double scenario, double script situation. Yes, I wonder how that would look. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. I don't remember if I asked this question previously, but I don't remember the answer, so I will ask it again. Did you encounter also, and what's your approach general to tagging the situations when the joke is based on the formal features of poetry, like the joke that is rhyme, for example, that breaks expectations, or like the absence of the syllable, where there should be a syllable, or something like that, where the form is linked with the with the content?
Yes, this is part of the joke table that I haven't shown that part, but we have an additional little section for versification phenomena. Actually, they are part of the logical mechanisms, but we set them a little bit apart because they have special value to us. But we consider them to be... We're still working on the list of our logical mechanisms, because one of the difficulties is to not have too many and not have too few. We want them to be the right size to fit our needs. And it's difficult to do that until we have more parts of the corpus that are tagged, so we can have a hindsight and say, oh yes, this happens, never, let's remove it from the list, and or this happens so often, let's divide it and make it more granular. But yes, this is the versification. Right now, the ones that we have are like caesura, hemistich, rhyme, alexandrine, that kind of thing.
Very cool, thanks.
I think we still have time for one question if someone has, otherwise I'm going to ask something. Do you have any questions? I was just kind of thinking, are you planning to publish this as kind of open data, or is it more like personal kind of research project data?
The texts and the data, they should be published at least before the end of the project, which is meant to end in 2024, possibly 25. The problem that we have is that some of our texts are copyrighted. It's more my problem than Lara and Niels, because they work on older corpora. But in my corpus, there's a lot of texts that are still under copyright, and those we cannot publish. But the data that comes out of them, that we can publish.
Are you also publishing the tagging?
Yes, that's what. Of course. The tag. This is meant to be shared. Of course, it's not yet, but yes, of course, it's part of the plan for sure.
Sounds wonderful. Any questions? Okay, then we are happy. Thank you.